All right. Hey, folks, welcome. My name is John Paul Vicari. My pronouns are he, him. I also go by JP. So if you hear our panelists today refer to me as that, please know they have full authority to. For a visual description, I'm currently seated in a black t-shirt. I have black glasses on, black curly hair, and dark olive skin. I am actually right now in Cape Town in South Africa, and it's just beautiful and sunny here. So hopefully the music and the sunshine in my background will bring some joy to your day as well. So today we're talking about a wonderful topic on building successful leadership and talent development programs. We've got two fantastic panelists lined up for you. And we're going to go ahead and just share some quick information about We Create Space in case you aren't familiar with us or you've not um, been on a webinar with us, in a little bit. And of course, I've already missed going over what our agenda is, but you've sort of heard me say some of this already. So I'm going to tell you in a second who we are, what we do. We'll do a cute little opening poll just to see where everyone's at, see how you're feeling, centered around today's topic. We're going to talk to Nancy and Zach for quite a long time. We're going to have tons of opportunity for you to ask questions along the way, share some key takeaways with you all that hopefully you can take and start implementing within your organizations, and then have time for some feedback from you all. And then we'll probably close out with another cute song because I just am really feeling musical today. So again, welcome. I see more people joining. So hi, hello. We Create Space is a community-led social enterprise. What we really specialize in is diversity, equity, and inclusion topics centered around LGBTQ plus people, but we do offer services full spectrum across DEI. We are made up of a collective of over 300 different people globally, folks like Zach and Nancy, who are joining us today to help bring expertise, lived experience, professional background, differences, location differences. We try to make every conversational as intersectional as possible, and really just are out here loving to help people. And in case you didn't know, as a social enterprise, the profits that we make from all of our corporate work gets reinvested back into the queer community globally. And that takes form in things like these webinars. We also do online webinars for more of our community at large. We do in-person events in select cities around the globe. We'll share a link to all of our events that are upcoming. So if you're in London or Barcelona, we've got several things coming up in the next few weeks. So make sure you go and meet some of our team members. And then it's also the profits are used for paid work opportunities for everyone in our collective to get paid for doing really great, phenomenal work with organizations around the world. Hopefully, you know that DEI is good for business, but if not, there's a ton of really great research out there. Highly recommend you check some of these out. One of the things that I always really love talking about with folks is that managers have a significant role in employee experience, like up to 70% of that satisfaction comes from managers, but only 40% feel confident discussing DEI topics. So there's a massive gap here for us to make improvements. Part of that is going to be what we're talking about today. I've mentioned quite a bit of what we do for the community, but in case you are a facts and figures person, again, tons of really great work that we've done between the number of corporate partners we've worked with and our online community, plus all of our free events and shared experiences. We do hikes as well, and some other really fun, cute social things. So again, definitely check those out. One thing that I do really like to highlight is that we're really here to talk about long-term impact in organizations. And you can see, client logos, and we are very proud of, every brand that we are working with and have worked with. But, really for us, it is more important that the solutions were actually helpful and made a difference. And so you can sort of see here, based off of direct client feedback, that they felt like they got significant value from working with us. So if you would ever like to talk to us about doing something specific for your organization, please get in contact and we'll share contact information at the end. Within a business, we support across all layers and aspects, which is really phenomenal. So if you are here today and you work in an ERG, and you're volunteering as a leader in that or a participant in that, or if you work in a specific department, we're going to cover lots of really great things for everyone. That's sort of the beauty of being in DEI, is that every department can benefit from it. And how we deliver all of the great things that we do is through a combination of workshops and webinars and panel discussions and programs, like, again, we're talking about today, as well as media partnerships and bespoke content building and consultancy and research. So just tons and tons of ways that you can work with us. So again, if you've got additional questions on that, please just let us know. I am super excited to talk about this topic with you all today. I personally have not gone through this type of like leadership or talent program at any organization I've worked with. And so I want to set the stage just a little bit so folks understand that we're talking about like lowercase l leadership, as in anybody in the business can be a leader, not just specifically folks who are in like leadership or people management positions. So again, this is going to be a broader overview. And the same for, when we use the word talent development, again, this is like professional development experiences, and really getting folks who are maybe primed for a promotion, or, people who've been in the business a long time and just want to explore a different career path. There's all sorts of different programs that we're going to touch base around. And Zach and Nancy are going to be joining us. So as they come back on camera, as I mentioned, we've got a poll for you. In fact, we have 2 poll questions. And there we go. And I was like, they're going to come up on your screen, and I thought it and happened. So question 1, does your organization offer any sort of leadership or talent development program? Simple answers here: yes, no, maybe you're not sure because you're new or it's never been discussed. And then if you have, we would love to know what your experience was, if you've participated in those. I think this is really helpful for us because we're going to want your comments on like what was really great, what wasn't. Obviously, use your judgment in naming, your organization, or if you just want to say like my experience was X. Don't feel like you have to disclose everything. And it looks like we've got some really great feedback already coming in. So I'm going to give this maybe just another 10 seconds if you've not answered the questions yet. And it's looking like everyone has. So we're going to share and show you the results. I'm actually surprised by this. 71% of folks, so 20 out of 28 people who are on the line right now, responded that their organization does offer some sort of development program. And then on the flip side, though, only 61% reported they've not taken part in it. So this is all really, really compelling. Like I said, Zach and Nancy are going to come back on camera and we're going to go ahead and dive in. But in the meantime, tell us where you're at, say hello in the chat. Please feel free to drop any questions, comments, anything of the sort in the chat along the way, and we'll be paying attention and responding as we can. So with that, I see Zach, Nancy.
And I'm having that problem again, John Paul, for
All
some
good.
reason. Yeah, it's
Got you covered. Go for it now.
okay. Let's see. There we are.
Surprise! We're all here.
Magic.
I love it. Well, I've introduced myself, but I would love for folks to get to know the both of you a little bit. So Nancy, I'm going to start with you. Tell us who you are, what makes you relevant to this conversation, why it brings you joy, all of the things. Tell us it all.
Well, thank you, John Paul. It's great to be here. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're calling in from. I'm Nancy Didia. My pronouns are she, her. Visual description, I'm wearing a blue sweater, white t-shirt. I have a sort of pixie punky haircut, gray hair, with some reddish lipstick and eyeglasses. And like Jean Paul, I have olive skin as well. So I have been in the corporate world for more than 35 years. I know I kind of hesitate to say that. In some cases, probably longer than some of you are old. So it's been quite a journey, and I recently retired from the corporate world almost a year ago, and I held the position of Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for more than 20 years of my career. I've worked both in financial services, life sciences, and I'm also a certified international executive coach. And I do a lot of coaching, not only in the DEI space, but leadership development. And I have been a beneficiary of many leadership development programs as well as an influencer on leadership development programs. So I'm excited to be here with Zach and you to have this great conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Zach, tell us
Hello,
everything about
everybody.
you.
So I saw a few different countries coming in. I was going to start with the Mabuhay and a Guten Tag, but I'm seeing more and more countries, and so that will take us too long. But welcome, excited to see everybody here. My name is Zachary Ames, he, him. My profession has always been in leadership and talent development, going on over 16 years, various spaces in New York as well as Singapore. So I've got that international taste and flavor, especially in, I think, relevant to today's conversation, running and developing leadership programs, particularly for underrepresented groups within larger multinational corporate spaces. So we'll talk a lot more about what works and what doesn't work in some of that. Leadership has always been what I call my through line. So I've also worked on various DEI teams, but it was always as their leadership or their learning specialist and helping roll out programs there. And really excited to be able to have this conversation today. Visually, you can't tell because I'm in a small box, but I'm about 6'5", very tall, skinny, blonde guy with a micro floral red and navy shirt on and some thick framed glasses.
Awesome. I'll be honest, I feel underqualified now between the two of you to even be having this conversation, but here we are. We're going to make it great. I kind of want to start simple. So let's say organizations looking or thinking about developing and producing a program for folks, again, whether that's sort of in the leadership realm or in, skill development, talent development. Like, what do you think they need to start with? Like, how do you even start this process? And Nancy, I'll come back to you first.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was going to yield to Zach, but I'm happy to start. I mean, given my frame of reference, I think you don't do leadership development programs just for the sake of doing them. They need to meet a business need and various competency and capabilities that you're seeking to um, embrace as a company, as an organization. So the intent typically is about how to groom your rising stars or recently appointed leaders into being able to grow into their current roles. So leadership programs serve a purpose not only for the present, but for the future on where the company is needing to go, generally speaking. And I think the last piece I'll just put here and have Zach give you much more detail than what I'm offering is it needs to be holistic in terms of everything. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a diversity leadership program, but that the concepts and elements of inclusion a sense of belonging, creating a culture where everyone feels like they can contribute needs to be a part of leadership, not outside of it. So I think the program needs to focus on the business aspects as well as the behavioral aspects in addition, because that typically is sometimes what's lost in some leadership development programs. But over to you, Zach.
Yeah, I think you're spot on in that we need to, I think all too often, and not in a bad way, I think it's well intended that we start with the people first, or we say, oh my gosh, Nancy has a lot of leadership potential. Let's put her in this program. But sometimes the mistake that gets made is that we aren't thinking about, as she pointed out, where is the business going? So if we don't know that we're on a high growth trajectory, that's very different than maintaining and stabilizing the ship, right? Two very different personalities of the type of leadership that we would even need. You all often see some CEOs will come in and they're great at in that merger and acquisition. They're good at getting people through change, but they aren't necessarily good at sustaining it. So when we know where the business is going, we can then work backwards from a very technical perspective. I've gone in and actually done what we called a critical role analysis, where you actually work with the business leaders, your HR business partners, actually identify agnostic of any person who's actually working there. Fundamentally, almost like an MBA business case, right? Just if this is where the business is going, what are the seats and the heads that we would need in place? Then you actually go, what's the skill set for those roles? Then you put people's names in and against that. And it doesn't mean if someone doesn't fit that role, they don't get it. It's actually then we produce the gap analysis. And that's what then becomes critical to go, okay, now we want Nancy. We still want her to be our head of sales, but we recognize here's the journey she needs to take in order to become that. And that becomes a really strong foundation. So that's the like super involved, everyone's on board, big business, like that's a lot. On the small end, sometimes though, there's nothing wrong with just starting. If you are an organization that's just trying to get this up and running, you don't have all those resources or that time. Sometimes it is just start with where you see those high potential folks, get them in a room together, put them through a key program, and just start to see results. And sometimes it's the opposite, that when the business starts to see, oh, we can actually improve behavior, they will start the funding and you can get a better business case to do some of these bigger, more technical components of some HR processes.
I love it. I love everything that you both said. I'm just already in awe. If you've heard something that you really loved in the first 5 minutes that this conversation's been happening, pop it in the chat. Zach, I wanted to come back to you because in our prep for this like event in general, we actually had a really like fun conversation sort of around where this sits in DEI and if this conversation was going to be more like programs that fall under the DEI banner or do the programs come first and like sit in different areas of the business? Can you maybe just like give folks some information or like your perspective on like, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way, but like, yeah, tell us your opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in the sense that I think for those of us who sit in those HR functions, we often are really clear of like the DEI team, this is what they do, and they sit over here, and the leadership team sits over here, and this is what they do, and then the HR business partners are here, and we all kind of know where our boundaries are, and obviously there's a lot of overlap, hopefully also a lot of partnership. But when I flip it, and if I were to think, oh, I'm an account manager, and I've been told there's a program going, most people don't understand the difference between those things. And so I think it's really important to understand that when someone sees something that's coming out of just the broad HR team and department, that it's kind of just seen as all one thing. So for me, the critical component of this is that partnership and that you aren't running a DEI leadership program over here that is then in parallel just your regular leadership development program over here, and mixed messages start to come out to play. That said, I don't think there's a right or wrong in the sense of who needs to own those pieces, or again, I think that's where the big Venn diagram comes in. One of the challenges I faced was trying to create more diversity training into our just 101 leadership program, so for first-time leaders. And what I found really interesting was that even some of my own colleagues and facilitators kind of struggled because it wasn't their specialty in terms of content. But if it's not that specialty and you're uncomfortable with that, I think that was the data point you showed earlier, 40% of managers are uncomfortable with DEI work. So we've got to integrate this and make it all look like it's one same voice. And same thing, these diversity programs sometimes go so far into the specialization of it, we lose some of the standard leadership 101, and it becomes this place where we can complain about the business, not learn how to be a leader within the business, right? So I think there's a fine balance sometimes in across these categories.
Yes, thank you. Love that. Nancy, I'm going to come back to you for this question first. So we've sort of now said, okay, well, we know maybe we're thinking about starting something. I think Zach just made a really good point of there not being a right or wrong way for it to live in the organization. But I think it's also important for people to know, like, what actually has worked for you? Like, what have you seen from, the design to the implementation to the execution to the measurement? Like, what are things for you that are hallmarks of a really strong, sustainable program? And then Zach, I'll bring you in after as well for this.
Well, first, ditto ditto to everything Zach said, and having been on both sides where sometimes it feels very siloed. I think the key takeaway for me through the years has been the importance of intersectionality of the various dimensions of uh, diversity, equity, ability, inclusion. And as we prepare leaders, it's important to recognize that they're managing more than binary people, that we are people that come together in a host of intersectional identities and belongings. And the more that we incorporate that type of view for leaders, the more we prepare them for the undiscussables, or what we refer to as the harder, oh my gosh, what if I say the wrong thing, to getting leaders to become comfortable with asking for guidance if they don't know what to say or how to approach it, but putting that intersectionality on the table, because not only are they going to need to navigate that with the staffs that they grow and develop, but let's take a commercial role or a sales role with the clients that they're going to interact with. Their clients also are going to change and are changing. And so to ensure the mindset is prepared for more than just male, female, but a variety. And as we look across the world, we look at the integration of various cultures and geographies and ethnicities. Those elements are crucial in how we lead and how we deliver our messaging.
I love that. I have a follow-up question, but I'm going to come to Zach first.
Sure.
So when measuring programs, again, I'm going to get a little more technical on this. There's a few different ways we can look at this. Kind of the industry standard is considered the Kirkpatrick model or methodology, so this isn't mine. There's kind of 4 layers at which you can start to look at any sort of program or session that you're even going through. So my guess is today, after even our webinar, you're going to get a survey that says, how did you like it? What did you learn? These kinds of things, right? So typically the number 1 is reaction. Did you enjoy it? Was it valuable? Like just your general response to the thing that happened. Then level 2 is, did you learn something? And can you actually take that away? Can you, this is, think about even in school, that's really what level 2 is. Did you learn the thing? Can you answer the question? Do you know that 40% blank, right? Level 3, though, this is where we really start to hope our leadership programs start to move the needle. Because if you say you learned something and you felt good about it, that's nice, but that doesn't really change the business. It doesn't change you. It doesn't change your team. So level 3 is where we're really looking at behavior. You used to give feedback this way. Now you give feedback that way. That becomes a massive shift. Again, when you scale this across a group of individuals, you start to make real difference. And then the last one, level 4, is actually results. So this, again, when I was in Singapore, we actually created a local leadership development program. So across a large multinational corporation that was based in New York, What was interesting, and this is very typical, we would fly people in from the UK or New York, so often very Western, into leadership positions across all of Asia. So we were very clear we wanted to change that. We wanted to have local talent from those communities, from those cities, working and becoming the leaders. So this was what we measured was number 4 was every year after our program, every single person who got any promotion became anything. That was our big baseline that we would always then, not just to say it was a success for us and our work, but a success to the organization for their support and everything else. So kind of 4 different ways that you can look at this. And again, the big asterisk as before, start where you can. If you have nothing, don't worry about these big longitudinal things, but know that that's probably where you should be taking it long term.
Zach, when you explain things like in the manner you just did, it sounds so achievable. Like I feel so inspired right now that I'm like, oh, this is 4 easy steps. Like I could just like go do this right now. And I
Zach
actually
is
remember,
brilliant. He's
yeah,
brilliant. He has an incredible way of taking the complexity, as you said, John Paul, and I'm not saying simplifying it, but explaining it in a way that makes sense. Because what he talked about coming out of the gate is that leadership programs aren't always a success in the first year. And to achieve level 4, which is a dream, could take years
yes.
to get there. But the way that metric that he's laid down for us is really the key way for us to know where we are in the change cycle. And and he used a very operative word, gaps. Where are the gaps? And where do we need to perhaps on the next cohort change or focus deeper in a certain area that we hadn't before. So I love, I like you, John Paul, I'm just enjoying uh, all the great advice and experience that Zach has to offer as well.
Well, conveniently, Nancy, you also semi-answered the question I was going to ask you, which was like, sort of based on your long career, right? Like, how have you been, or I guess, maybe not how have you measured it over time? Because I think Zach just gave some really good examples on that. But in programs that you've either been a part of or put out for other folks, like, what is that timeline? Like, how many years is it for people to see change? And how do you get people on board knowing that this is going to take longer than what people think, right? I think a lot of people come in and they're like, oh, we can do this and it's going to be 6 months and everything's going to be great. Like my whole business is going to flourish. But that's not really reality, right? So tell us, like, what does that length of time mean and why is that so important to know?
Well, I'd like to go back to, the experience that Zach talked about in Singapore when you bring Western cultures and South Asian cultures together or European cultures in a multinational or in a global organization. What I learned most in my global leadership development was that leadership is not a one size fits all. And there needs to be the grace and space to just the way we do with each other to accept that style difference or how people ladder up to the necessary change that they need to make behaviorally to how they're going to show up as leaders. Overlay that with the culture and the values of the culture that you're working in or that you're establishing. And do those behaviors ladder up to the values of what you say you want your company to be in terms of retention, in terms of attracting talent and progressing and promoting that talent across the life cycle of your employee, right? Or your associate, however you look at it. So the most powerful leadership programs for me have been global, not the ones in the US. And I've been through both. But the one that I remember the most was the one where I was in a program with people from all over the world who actually you find it quite eye-opening because so many times, having worked most of my career out of the US, but for global organizations. There's something about, and I hope I don't offend any US based companies, that the US always thinks they have the best, they know the best way to do it. And when you lead with that, you miss opportunities about ways to be more inclusive and ways to be more open. So, what I have hoped that some of my colleagues through the years have learned was the beauty of global integration and global understanding and that multicultural integration and how it plays out, and to hold that space for that multicultural engagement. Does that get close to what you were asking me?
100% it does.
Okay.
So thank you so much. Zach, I think this is a good segue into maybe thinking along the lines of, like, so many people want to have these programs, right? They're brought in with really positive intent. We've talked about how important it is to have partners, in alignment across the business. But reality is, it's like sometimes things don't go as planned, or like the motivation or engagement drops, and so it sort of just falls off the radar. Like, how do we prevent that?
Yeah, really quickly before answering that, one other just small note to follow up on Nancy. It's not only to hold the space for everyone else culturally. What we found to be really successful was you also had to give the insider scoop to the way the company works, or again, a New York, very specific, right? In my case, that fast pace, all those things. And so we would even talk about that as like a Jekyll and Hyde moment. We would
Yeah.
teach people and vice versa. So I had to learn as an American to like calm down, listen more, all these kinds of things. But we also had to teach some of our local talent how to speak up on calls because they would already had worked a full day. They're on call at 9 p.m. But if they're never even heard, they're not seen, they're definitely looked over, right? So it's also important, regardless if you are thinking of a more, but not even global, right? Even if it's just your engineering team versus your sales team and they're trying to communicate, it's just that cross cultural, regardless of the microculture. But setting your leaders up for success means you need to know how to communicate differently. To that point of how then do we keep these things alive? Actually, and I think this again is part of that. For example, we actually were very intentional, and here's one of the big tricks of all of these types of programs is you need senior leader sponsorship that does not sit in HR. So we had,
I'm
again, even
sorry,
though,
can you repeat that
yeah,
for the people in
get
the
a
back?
senior
Say it
leader
again.
sponsor for your program that is not in HR. So I'm sure somebody believes either whether it is a diversity program or it is your leadership program or just general talent management, or again, maybe it's your analyst development program and it's entry level or college recruiting, wherever you sit, whatever you do, if you have a senior leader, preferably C-suite, if not one below, who has actual political sway and positional power in your organization, they are your sponsor. They send certain emails. They speak at certain events. They report on the results, right? Because if it's just little old you who's the manager of corporate education or whatever, it doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just that idea of the energy and the momentum, or again, the weight of it. So we had the COO who sat in New York, was the corporate sponsor for our Asian-based leadership development program, right? So we had a tie in the halls where those conversations are coming, where those budgets are getting approved, all that type of thing. So that to me was always as critical as can possibly be in order for it to really make a difference as you're moving your programs forward.
Love that. Um, we've got a few comments and questions coming in about your statement, which I
Yeah,
love.
let's go.
But someone has now asked, why can't they be in HR? Um, so yeah, tell us more about why it's important to have, again, that sort of cross company sponsorship.
So what we always found was that oftentimes because what's happening, so as a great example, right? We need to get into the shoes of the people we're selling to, right? Kind of like classic marketing or classic sales. or even storytelling. You got to get in the shoes of your audience. If I'm trying to say, I have a leadership program that's going to take 6 months, I want your people off of their desk in my classroom for X number of hours per month, plus doing work in between with an accountability partner and all the things we know that work. Every minute that they are doing your work, guess what? They're not doing theirs. And that's the first thing, and unfortunately, the only thing most senior leaders actually care about. It's productivity. And if you pull someone off a sales desk, they're not making money, right? 101. So if I get the head of sales, though, to be the sponsor for a certain program, I've already beat out every person in the middle management section who's going the VP of this or the regional manager of that. Because if the global head of sales says this is important, you win every single time. HR consistently and unfortunately, trust me, I would love for this to be different. HR is never going to fully be seen as that equal power in the organization. They're looking like the person who is telling you what to do. They're the principal or the headmaster of the school who's saying these are the things you're supposed to do. So the more that you get the buy-in from your actual clients, you just reduce so much friction and you build empowerment and partnership in a very different way. It just makes life easier to front load it rather than find the resistance throughout it.
I would just add a slightly different point of view to that, and I think what Zach is saying is true for many companies. However, the CHR role has evolved to be very focused on the business and the growth of the business, and depending upon the CHO, their credibility does carry weight at times. I think an alternative or another approach is the CHRO standing with the CEO, um, talking about the need for this shift in order for the business to grow or to change, really drives a message to all senior leaders, whether it's a senior leader forum or a town hall or something to that extent. But um, Zach's point is the reality. You know, you take a commercial role or you take a production or an operations role, and you can't afford to have those in manufacturing off the floor if you're manufacturing products or medicines or whatever that may be. And I think it works both ways. It depends on the company, the industry. Um, but I would venture to say, and I don't mean to speak for Zach, that given his experience, more times than not, the HR piece fell flat and the business piece carried it further. But I do think, especially for the Georgie who challenged us, I do think you can try a hybrid approach to that.
Yeah, and I'm using, and this is, of course, was been some of my personal experiences, right? Different organizations have different cultures, and if you've got the relationship, like kudos, well done. I'm
Exactly.
just what if you're hearing what I'm not saying is go get that person. What I want you to think about is what are your potential barriers and how do you reduce them? That's the goal more than anything. To JP's question of the sustainability, that's the thing. People will tell you yes up front, right? But they aren't committed. You may have convinced them, yes, I need that budget. You may have convinced them, yes, this is important. But when rubber meets the road and 3 months down the line, someone's not showing up and you're sending that email being like, someone's always consistently late or these things. And they go, yeah, we don't really care because you've convinced them you've not gained their commitment. And that's the goal. So think about that. And that can work in multiple layers. Sponsorship's just one example of how you can reduce that resistance.
Thank you, Paul. Hopefully that answers some of the questions and comments that came in. If not, let us know. There's some other ones that came in that I think I'm going to wait just a minute because I want to ask just two other, I think, really important questions. So let's assume we've got sustainable programs happening. People are enjoying them. The business is seeing success. Success is depending on how they're measuring that. Let's start maybe thinking about if we want to do more specialized programs, right? So this brings it sort of back to that DEI umbrella. Like we're now thinking we want to do maybe a program for LGBTQ plus people, or it is important that we put everyone through like an anti-racism training, right? Like, why is it important to have specific programs, groups, things set aside for marginalized groups? Either one of
Want
you
me
can
to start, Zach?
Yeah.
Okay. So first and foremost, let me just preface it that given the current environment in the US, this is um, the big dilemma right now. Regardless of what's going on that is politicized or moving companies or away from this approach, there is intense value in understanding the challenges that different groups face that are not in the majority or that are not in the in groups. And typically you see these disparities happen on the gender side, on the intersectional pieces with race, LGBTQ, neurodiversity, physical, other cognitive diversities, disabilities, things of that sort. And I'm not saying that these individuals should get special treatment. But what I am saying is that sometimes we lead with an understanding, well, if it if it's not me or if I'm not that way, then there's no issue. Or if I've never experienced that, that's not an issue. And the key to developing leaders is to see things from a lens that's not your own. And you can sit there, and I'm saying that we expect leaders to have a vision and to have a view, but to be able to listen with a lens that opens your mind and your heart to understand what it's like to be that individual in your company is really crucial. And the only way you can do that is when you have individual groups that are safely designed that people are and I use that in quotes, that people feel that they're not going to be attacked because of who they are, how they identify, how they express. But there's value in people who don't socialize with these individuals or groups to understand what it's like to walk a mile or a kilometer in their shoes, in their workplace. Because I'm going to use this capital P, privilege. If you're privileged in terms of being in the majority, you don't realize the doors that have been slammed behind you, and the people that had that door slammed in their face from a talent perspective, from an interview perspective. If you're in the in circle, life's great. But the majority of people who are not in the in circle continue to climb and struggle with very little support. So these targeted specific programs provide laddering for individuals to become their best self, especially when leaders acknowledge their lack of understanding and their ability to be allies and sponsors. And to me, this is where being a leader is not so much being um, the sponsor to drive through and cut through the bureaucracy, but to show allyship in areas that you're not familiar with, especially the ones that you're least familiar with. To me, that's the true leader.
I love all of that. And basically, I was going to say, if I answer it, it's just going to be that, but in slightly different language. I think what's interesting is, for me, it's twofold are the most important pieces. One is, as Nancy said, there are certain conversations that are happening, certain life experiences that happen that when you are able to kind of put a container around that and provide a space for people to share and understand some of those emotional pieces. As a certified coach as well, so much of my work when I'm with leaders is all the personal inside challenge and struggles, right? And so I don't feel good enough. I don't understand this, or I'm worried about this. And like all those things are like, when I was young, this happened. So therefore I think about this, right? To do that then in a group setting that is specific to a lived queer life, I think, is really special, as you said. If we were to do, say, an LGBTQ leadership development program, you can talk about things that you wouldn't talk about in a anyone and everyone from the company comes and shows up. You can really get to the heart of some of, again, those barriers, and then we can hopefully smooth out that road. The second one for me, though, and it's interesting because the other piece is quite often in most corporate spaces, we also don't have a large, it's why it's called underrepresented, right? We don't have a big enough of a group to sometimes even make that as a cohort. So I'm actually launching Prism Leadership soon to be a queer leadership accelerator so that companies can send queer leaders to something outsourced that is specific to meet these needs. One of the important pieces that we are building into this program, though, is, and I love the word Nancy used, is sponsorship. Because again, if you take out the anatomy of how people rise in corporations, it's a very specific and somewhat predictable path. And it's not just, oh, did I have the opportunity and did I get to go on that leadership program? It's when you're in that inner circle, or what I call the in group, we don't even realize the development we do for people outside of programs. When you're walking from the meeting back to your desks and that one leader takes you to the side and says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe JP said da 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 da," or "Hey, when we get back to our desk, make sure you call so and so because that's important," or when that leader picks up the phone after and starts yelling at the other leader for whatever happened, you're learning how to lead in that organization. And you don't even know it. It's not deliberate. And then the sponsorship of, hey, come to this meeting with me, or I'm going to speak up for this person. It's often done like to like. Women, I think, have done the best so far in this and creating he for she campaigns. They've done really good on allyship. They are starting to rise in the ranks. Women are able to start sponsoring other women. What we are not seeing this, and the data is proving this, I'm continuing to research this, queer individuals are not sponsoring other queers in the same way. And quite frankly, we don't like this word, but no one teaches us the politics of rising in corporate spaces. And it is a very specific new language, it's new behaviors. And so we need to be able to create and foster spaces where people can learn those things in order to accelerate. Otherwise, people do really good at getting to mid-level positions and no one is welcoming them into or opening the door for them.
Brilliant. Yep.
Both of you, I'm just gonna log off. Like I
No, we have
True
questions.
mic
We've got
drop.
questions
I
from
know,
the
I know.
audience.
We have so many questions. Um, we've seen a handful of questions come in, and Zach, you started alluding to this in your answer, and Nancy, you've touched on this a little bit as well. But I do think like we need to have a conversation about like how do you find the right partner? Like how do you know if you're going to bring in somebody external that they're going to be a good fit for your organization? Like what maybe questions would you ask? I've had extensive time working with both of you at We Create Space, so like if someone were to ask me, like, I could recommend the two of you, right? And We Create Space, no problem, right? But I also know questions to ask. So, like, what are some of the pitfalls of going with the wrong person? How do we avoid that? Give us the tea.
I'll jump in really quickly. I think my number one flag is when someone is just trying to pitch their product. So and I mean, or you'll hear the other language of this is like off the shelf. If someone thinks they have a one size fits all perfect solution and they aren't listening to you, hang up that, like just end the call early. Like don't waste your time with someone who says, if you sign up for my 3-course package with these 3 things, then you're going to solve everything that you need. It doesn't mean that can't be the core and they may have stumbled on the correct framework and there's certain value there, but there has to be at least an 80 to 20, and then the 20% is customized, right? Someone who's really willing to partner with you because, again, every company has different values. They look at leadership differently. They communicate differently. Maybe it is a little bit more indirect versus direct. And if you don't understand that and all you're doing is saying, we believe in the fair framework for blank, it doesn't, who cares, right? How does that actually apply and what are we doing with that is most critical. The other big one I find, and I think the reason I have a lot of success with my clients is I do my best to meet them where they are. And again, this is kind of the other side of the same coin of what I've just said, is all too often, and I think in diversity spaces, and I get it and I understand why. Many of us, probably even on this call, we are 3 or 4 steps ahead of many of our colleagues. We're coming to webinars like this on our own time. We're engaging in these conversations online. We're aware of these other best practices. So we assume that the conversation should be here. And yes, in a way, it should. But the reality is, in order to get from A to D, we've got to go through B and C. And all too often, a vendor or a consultant will come and try to get you to D, and you're going to fail because you're leapfrogging and not getting from A to B. So a lot of the work I do is to investigate, where is my client today and how do I move them a step forward tomorrow? And again, build on that momentum so we can get you to where you are. But when we start, if you find a consultant or someone who's shaming and blaming you for where your company is, that's also for me a big red flag, because it's not about, yes, we should be here and we can have that conversation, but respectfully. But if they can't map the journey to that point and they just want to talk about the best practices in the world, that also doesn't, it might feel good in the meeting and go, oh yeah, we should be there. I agree. You've got to step back and go, but how are you going to get us there? Because that's the journey, and that's where, again, the stamina, the sustainability, that's the real challenge. And too many people sell the pot of gold and no one tells you how to get over the rainbow.
And
Love that response.
oh,
Nancy,
uh,
yeah,
well,
bring it in. I want to hear from you.
plus one, two of what Zach said. I think the operative word is that it's the way in which the um, consultant approaches your company. And what I mean by that is, are they approaching with curiosity to understand what your pain points have been? And are they doing more of the questioning versus the telling? And Zach knows this as a coach, right? We are assessed on our ability to ask powerful questions to help the client to think. And remember, you're a specialist, right? As a provider, um, you have best practices, but I wouldn't necessarily go in there bragging about what you know until you find out what the client needs. So it's sort of the first conversation should be the what, why, and how. A little bit of Simon Sinek mindset here of what is it that you're trying to achieve? What have you done in the past? How did that play out? Um, what are other people's views in the organization outside of this room? Can I speak with them? Would you be okay with that? And factoring into your proposal or your plan of action is really co-created with the client so that you don't come to the table with, here's what you need. It's really more of a restatement. Here's what I heard. And based on what I heard, I would need X amount of time to help you through. And I think the last piece that's so crucial is that we as specialists, as consultants, need to understand the client and the business and what the business is going through. So anything that the client can share in advance with the consultant to better frame their questions will always help. And, Zach pointed out all the um, caution lights, that I would worry about. If the consultant is doing too much of the talking, that's a problem.
I love
So I
it.
know we only have a few minutes, John Paul, and there's so many questions. And I just want to call out the audience. They're so engaged, and thank you all for the kind words. I'm glad we resonated with you.
Yeah, I can't believe how quickly this time went by.
I know.
Yet again, another 60-minute webinar felt like 5 minutes. I would love for each of you to give 1 or 2 key takeaways in a minute or less.
I think my key takeaways, even as I'm thinking about my own programming, like this is actually good. This is good for me to talk this out as well. Um, One, begin with the end in mind, right? So again, where is it that we want to go? I think that's really smart. But then how do we work backwards through barriers? To me, that's my number one. And the other piece that we didn't really talk about when we think about where that learning happens, or again, when we're rating it, one of the challenges in our ability to rate success of things is that it's hard to observe it. Sometimes we can build that that's the really advanced level of some work that can be done, but it's oftentimes the in between and the mortar. And I think sometimes as program creators, or for those of you listening, as you're thinking about creating a program, you're going to get stressed over what's every piece of language in that facilitator guide and what's every word on the slides. And I have to get all this knowledge and information out. I have found time and time and time again, the magic actually happens in between. It's not what you have on the slide, it's what the conversation that happens at the coffee break when that guy from sales and that person from engineering have the conversation and they realize, oh, we have the same struggle. It's the Even in a webinar, sometimes I will open up different spaces and I have them teach each other or they share their challenges. And that's when the magic really comes to life. I like to think I know what I'm doing, but I will never put myself in front of the ability of other people to do great work for themselves, because at the end of the day, I often walk away. They're the ones left doing the work. And so build in that space, make sure there's enough coffee, make sure there's enough time for people to interact, because it's not about the facilitator, it's not about the host, it's about them.
Nancy.
Brilliant as usual, Zach. My key takeaway is similar to what Zach said, but to recognize that it's always a work in progress and it's never done. Um, and the moment you think it's done is the moment it's outdated. So the program constantly needs to be revised, reapproached to address the market needs, the global needs. And look at our world. I mean, our world is incredibly unpredictable. And we have to look at our programs as being unpredictable. We can have the solid foundational pieces in there, but the agility that's required to perform in today's workplaces is so necessary. And these programs need to model that agility that we're preaching, if you will, to leaders. So I think agility, flexibility, space, and grace, my favorite words, to allow people to be their authentic selves and to step out of your zone to be the person you want to be authentically.
That is truly better than any key takeaways that I could have written on my own. So I'm just so appreciative, again, to bear witness and learn from the both of you. If you enjoyed this session, please take a minute. The link to the surveys in the chat. You can also scan this QR code. We want your feedback. We want to know what you enjoyed, maybe what you didn't enjoy. What do you want to hear about in the future? So please, please, please take a few minutes and do that. I know we're just at time, but again, Nancy, Zach, I am just so grateful that we have folks like you out there in the world doing this work, helping corporations make a difference in people's lives. It is so in line with the We Create Space values. And I'm, again, just so honored that I got to spend this hour with you both. So thank you so much.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you. It was a distinct pleasure. Thank you.
I love it. For folks still hanging out with us, feel free to put any other things in the chat if you want to say goodbye, if you want to comment about how I quickly improved my lighting situation because I couldn't handle it, because it's really dark in here. Feel free. But thank you all. And keep in mind, we've got more of these coming up in the next 2 months. We've got in-person events. Get in touch with us. We want to talk to you. We can get you in touch with Nancy and Zach as well if you are interested in working with them. So have a great Tuesday, everyone.